Welcome, my friends. Tonight we journey into a scenario where the script of interstellar invasion gets flipped rather spectacularly. Imagine, if you will, skies filled not with the promise of rain, but with metal behemoths, silent and imposing. They've come, expecting a planet of warriors, a species ready to defend its home with tooth and claw, laser and missile. Instead, they find, well, something else entirely, something that smells faintly of bergamot and existential ponderings. You watch these colossal ships blotting out your familiar constellations, and a strange calm settles over you. It's the kind of calm that precedes either profound enlightenment or, total annihilation. Honestly, you probably won't survive this particular cosmic misunderstanding with all your preconceived notions intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not type your current location and local time into the comments below? It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from as we embark on these little voyages of the mind. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel it first, don't you? A tremor in the very air, a hum that resonates deep in your chest, like the lowest note of a cosmic pipe organ, so profound it seems to vibrate your very bones. It's almost as if those sky trumpets people occasionally report hearing, those eerie, metallic groans echoing from an unseen source. We're just a terribly out-of-tune intergalactic orchestra, warming up for the grand performance. You pause, mid-sip of your afternoon beverage, a half-eaten biscuit hovering. The birds, moments ago, engaged in their usual territorial squabbles, have fallen utterly silent. Even the distant drone of city traffic seems to have muted itself, holding its breath. Then, the light changes, not a flicker, not a storm cloud, but a creeping shadow, vast and absolute, begins to devour the midday sun. It crawls across the park, swallows the street, and climbs the walls of your building, painting everything in an unnatural twilight. You find yourself drifting towards the window, drawn by an irresistible, almost primal curiosity. And there they are. Ships. Oh, but these are not the sleek silver darts you've seen in old movies. Those charmingly naive depictions of alien craft. No, these are brutalist architecture on a planetary scale, jagged, dark, impossibly large, hanging there as if the sky itself has cracked open to reveal some terrible, mechanical truth lurking just beyond the blue. They are monoliths of silent, obsidian-like material, absorbing the light, defying gravity with an indifference that speaks of power beyond your wildest imaginings. One, then three, then a dozen, until the sky is a crowded canvas of these silent, brooding giants. They don't glint, they absorb. They don't hum with obvious energy. They emanate a palpable presence. You glance at your neighbor, old Mrs. Higgins, who is out on her balcony. She's adjusting her prize-winning petunias just a little to the left, ensuring they get what remains of the dapple ship-filtered sunlight. You suppose she catches your eye, offers a placid nod, then goes back to her flowers. No screaming, no running, not even a particularly dramatic gasp. Down the street, a group of teenagers, initially agog with mouths forming perfect O's, are now debating the best camera angles for their social media feeds. One of them is trying to get the largest alien flagship and a passing, brightly colored recycling truck in the same shot. #alien rival aesthetic, or perhaps cosmic visitors meet municipal damages. Their voices, usually sharp and loud, are oddly subdued, a mixture of awe and the ingrained reflex to document everything. It's a scene replicated, you imagine, across the globe. A sort of hush, yes, but not the hush of terror. It's more like the collective intake of breath before a particularly surprising magic trick, like the Tunguska event back in 1908, where a colossal explosion flattened miles of Siberian forest, and for years, no one could quite agree if it was a meteor, a comet, or something even stranger. The initial reports were less panic, more profound, head-scratching bafflement. This feels like that, magnified a billionfold. Historians still argue whether the collective human response to truly paradigm-shattering events is one of genuine stoicism, or simply a mass processing error, our brains collectively short-circuiting when faced with something too far outside the box of normal experience. Are you calm, or are you just buffering up there in those silent behemoths? One can only imagine the scene. Scanners sweeping, diligently mapping population centers, analyzing atmospheric composition, and cross-referencing everything with their extensive databases on Class 7b civilizations prone to primitive aggression. Targeting systems are, no doubt, locking onto military bases, government buildings, and perhaps mistakenly, that particularly large shopping mall on the edge of town that always has such aggressive Black Friday sales. They must be expecting, what? A flurry of missiles arcing skyward, a global defense grid lighting up like a particularly angry Christmas tree, panic broadcasts from world leaders calling for futile resistance. Instead they get you looking up, my baby, with a slight squint because the fractured sunlight is just peeking around the edge of their glorious conquest vessel number 3. Their communications officers, tasked with overriding global broadcasts to deliver their dire pronouncements of dominion, probably find themselves scrolling through an endless archive of cat videos and celebrity cooking shows, wondering if this is some advanced form of deeply confusing psychological warfare. Are these humans unconcerned? Or is this some elaborate trap, a planetary rope-a-dope of truly epic proportions? The ships hang there, a silent, overwhelming statement. They have blotted out your sky, altered your daylight, and introduced a variable into the equation of your life so enormous it's almost impossible to compute. And yet, the dominant feeling on the street below, in your own heart, is not terror. It's a profound, almost meditative curiosity. The kettle, you notice, has just finished boiling. The click it makes seems extraordinarily loud in the sudden, vast quiet imposed by your new, colossal, and entirely uninvited cosmic landlords. You wonder, vaguely, if they take sugar. The click of the kettle shutting off echoes in the sudden, expansive silence gifted by your new celestial overlords. You reach for the tea caddy, the familiar scent of dried leaves, a small anchor in this ocean of the unknown. Earl Grey today, you Grey today. Thing. Its bergamot fragrance always feels a bit like a gentle hug for the brain. You spoon the leaves into your favorite teapot, the chipped one with the faded painting of a robin. It's seen you through countless minor crises, from looming deadlines to existential Tuesday mornings. Why not a potential intergalactic subjugation? Just as you're pouring the hot water, a new sound slices through the quiet. It's not the deep, resonant hum from before, not the eerie call of those sky trumpets we pondered earlier. This is a high-pitched, piercing whine, like a colossal dental drill preparing for some universe-sized cavity work. Simultaneously, a beam of light, blindingly white, lances down from the belly of the nearest colossal ship, striking the center of the park across the street. It's so bright you have to bright. Shield your eyes, the afterimage dancing like phosphorescent confetti. When you blink, dust and leaves billow outwards from the impact point. Though impact seems too violent a word, it's more like the light, arriving with forceful precision. For decades, humanity sent out its own tentative feelers into the vast cosmic dark, like the Arecibo message with its quaint binary depiction of our DNA. And we listen for whispers from the cosmos, even catching that one tantalizing "wow" signal back in '77 that got everyone so excited, a brief blip of structured noise that was never heard again. Now, the cosmos hasn't just whispered back. It's parked a fleet on your doorstep and appears to be using a spotlight that could illuminate a small moon. When the glare subsides, a figure stands in the beam's residual glow, or rather, a projection of a figure, 20 feet tall, shimmering slightly at the edges like a badly tuned hologram. It's all very dramatic. Being depicted is, well, it's certainly going for an intimidating aesthetic. Thin, broad, armored shoulders, a helmet that looks like an angry insectoid beetle, glowing red optics, and more sharp, pointy bits than a porcupine in a sword factory. If this were a video game, this would be the tutorial boss you're meant to lose to, just to show you how tough the game is going to be. It holds a staff, or perhaps a very ornate energy weapon, that crackles with faint, blue sparks. Then it rocks. Speak. The voice is amplified, distorted, a booming baritone that seems to press down on your eardrums. Mortals of planet Dirt. It begins, the universal translator apparently taking a few liberties with Earth. Gaze upon the visage of Warlord Kethar of the glorious Kethragan hegemony. Your pitiful sphere is now, by decree of the Supreme Overcouncil, a protectorate of our ever-expanding dominion. The voice pauses, clearly for dramatic effect, or maybe to allow for terrified screaming. You wait, teapot still in hand. Mrs. Baugh merely peers around her largest rose bush with mild interest. Your meager defenses are inconsequential, Kethar continues, his projected form gesturing with the crackling staff. Your civilizations, such as they are, will be assimilated. Your resources shall fuel our mighty war fleets. Your populace will serve. Resistance is ill-advised. Another pause. The teenagers down the street are now trying to get a selfie with the giant holographic warlord in the background. One of them is making bunny ears behind another's head. You finish pouring the water into the teapot, the aroma of bergamot now mingling with a faint, almost metallic scent of ozone drifting in from the park. It's moments like these that make you appreciate figures like Tisquantum, often called Squanto, who, having learned English from earlier encounters with European explorers and fishermen, was able to bridge the seemingly impossible communication gap with the Pilgrims in the early 17th century. Without him, their first Thanksgiving might have involved fewer shared dishes and considerably more mutual bewilderment, or worse. You wonder if Kethar has a Squanto, probably not one that speaks calm human with a penchant for tea. You have precisely one of your solar rotations, Kethar booms, clearly a bit miffed by the distinct lack of terrified shrieking or immediate surrender signals. T offer your unconditional submission to the will of the Kragan hegemony. Failure to comply will result in significant planetary redecoration. He punctuates this with a gesture that seems to imply vaporization, or possibly just some very aggressive landscaping. It's hard to tell with giant holographic alien warlords. Their body language isn't always universally understood. The teapot needs to steep for 3 minutes for optimal flavor. You picked up your favorite mug, the one that says, "I don't do mornings," and then an idea, simple and straightforward, pops into your head. You grab a second mug, the plain blue one. Kethar is still holding his dramatic pose, red optics sweeping the silent cityscape. He probably expected a montage of global leaders having frantic emergency meetings, or at least a few tanks rolling futilely into view. What he's getting is the gentle clinking of ceramic. You open your window, "Excuse me," you call out, your voice surprisingly steady. "Yeah. Was it?" The giant holographic head swivels, its glowing red eyes focusing on your window with an expression that might be surprise, if angry insectoid beetles could look surprised. "Up here." You wave a hand. "I've just made a pot of Earl Grey. Would you, or perhaps a designated representative, care for a cup? It's quite good. Helps with the nerves, I find. And you do seem a little tense." You hold up the two mugs. "I've got sugar, or there's honey if you prefer. Unless you have your own biosweetener protocols, of course. Don't want to cause an intergalactic incident over a cuppa." There's a profound silence. Even the crackling from Keithar's staff seems to falter. The projected image flickers for a moment. Down in the park you can almost hear a pin drop, or at least a teenager snorting with suppressed laughter. Anthropologists continue to debate whether the instinct to offer sustenance or gifts during initial encounters with the other is a deeply ingrained primate social strategy designed to pacify, or a culturally learned behavior intended to initiate dialogue. Right now it just feels like the polite thing to do. He looks like he could use a break. Conquering planets must be exhausting work. Conquering planets must be exhausting work. Once, twice, voice, when it finally returns, is several decibels lower, and laced with something that sounds suspiciously like galactic bewilderment. Warlord Cathar, booming, if now slightly bewildered. Query, hangs in the air, thick as treacle. You offer a patient smile to the giant, shimmering hologram whose red optics are still fixed on your window. "Yes, you confirm, as if discussing the weather, which, in fairness, has become considerably more dramatic with the Thragon fleet parked upstairs. It's a hot beverage made from leaves. Very popular here. Good for thinking, or for not thinking, if that's what you prefer. This batch is Earl Grey, but if you'd rather, I could brew up some Darjeeling. It's a bit lighter, perhaps more suited for a first-time cosmic conqueror. More of an afternoon tea, really." The hologram of Keithar remains silent for a long moment, the only sound a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanating from the colossal ship above, and the distant, confused chirping of a bird that has decided the apocalypse might not be happening right today. After all, you almost feel like you're in a play orchestrated by Alfred Jarry, the eccentric French writer who championed pataphysics, the science of imaginary solutions, and the physics of the absurd. This entire situation feels like a graduate-level seminar in it. Finally, the 20-foot projection wavers, then shrinks with a disconcerting shimmer, collapsing in on itself until a more life-sized, though still impressively armored, version of Warlord Cathar stands, or rather hovers, just outside your window on what appears to be a small, personal anti-gravity disc. He looks like a particularly disgruntled action figure who has just been told playtime is over. "Your offer is unorthodox," Cathar states, his voice still amplified but no longer shaking the window panes. The red optics scan your living room, visible through the open window, lingering on the bookshelf, the slightly lopsided lampshade, and the cat who has now emerged and is observing Keithar with the disdainful indifference only a feline can truly master. Perhaps, you concede, fetching the Darjeeling, a change of pace feels appropriate, but these are unorthodox times. Wouldn't you agree? Come in, if you like, or I can bring it out to the balcony. Mind the petunias. Mrs. Story Higgins is very particular about them. After a moment that you suspect involves a flurry of frantic, confused communications with his flagship, actually maneuvers his disc onto your small balcony. He remains standing, rigid, his hand never far from the ornate weapon at his side. You set out a small tray, the teapot of freshly brewed Darjeeling, 2 cups, the good china, you decide. Why, what china? Not a small jug of milk. Do Kragans even eat milk? A bowl of sugar cubes, and a plate of your best biscuits, the ones with the chocolate chunks you usually hide from yourself. Hey, S.O., you begin, pouring him a cup. The aroma is delicate, muscatel-like. Milk, sugar. Cathar stares at the teacup, as if it's some kind of cunningly disguised explosive device. This tea, it is a ritual substance. Some might say that, you reply, adding a splash of milk to your own. Others just think it's a nice drink. Biscuit, you offer the plate. He eyes a chocolate chunk biscuit. Is this solidified nutrient paste close enough, you say cheerfully? Try one. They're quite comforting, with what seems like monumental effort, and possibly against several dozen Kefragan military protocols. Warlord Qatar removes a gauntlet. His hand, surprisingly humanoid if a little grayer and with an extra tomb, hesitantly reaches for a biscuit. He examines it, sniffs it, then takes a tiny bite. His mandibles, or what you assume are mandibles beneath the lower part of his helmet, work slowly. Takes another larger bite. The Kragan hegemony has assimilated countless worlds, he says, his voice slightly muffled by the biscuit. Tangiwa. We have encountered warrior races, passive primitives, hive minds, gaseous entities, but never this. Oh, this, you ask, sipping your tea. This calm offering of backed goods and infused liquids in the face of overwhelming lactic might. He sounds genuinely perplexed. My fear inducement index is usually off the charts on newly contacted planets. This planet registers as mild curiosity and a high probability of unsolicited catering. You can't help but chuckle. Well, we've had a lot of practice with unexpected visitors, and you know, being overwhelmingly mighty doesn't leave much room for a good conversation, does it? Tends to make the other party a bit preoccupied with not being vaporized. It's a bit like those stories from the Great War, the Christmas truce of 1914, where soldiers from opposing trenches spontaneously laid down their arms, climbed out of the fire, mud, and shared cigarettes, sang carols, and even played football. Utterly illogical from a military standpoint, yet profoundly human, or perhaps just profoundly sentient. A brief, flickering candle of shared being in the vast darkness of conflict. S.O. Warlord Cathar. You continue, munching on a biscuit yourself. You've come all this way, across the terrifyingly vast emptiness of space. What were you hoping to find when you got here? Besides, resources and new recruits for your hegemony. Cathar slowly sips his tea. His helmet makes it hard to gauge his expression, but the red optics seem a fraction less intense. The hegemony expands. It is the natural order. We bring strength, order, purpose to lesser civilizations. Purpose, you muse. That's a big one. What sort of purpose would that be? And who decides if a civilization is lesser? Is there a galactic standard survey for that? Or is it more of a gut feeling after you've parked your very large ships in their sky? Linguists still wrestle with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the very structure of a language can shape how its speakers perceive and understand the world. You wonder what concepts are simply untranslatable between your relatively straightforward English and Cathar's presumably complex, clicking, guttural Kefraganese. Words like hegemony and dominion probably translate just fine. But what about contentment or a quiet afternoon with a good book? We offer structure, Cathar says, a little less certainly now. He seems to be finding the biscuit more compelling than the conversation out imperial doctrine, freedom from the chaos of unguided development. Ah, the chaos? You noted development sagely. It can be terribly inconvenient, all that messy free will and unpredictable creativity. So, you see, the universe is inherently meaningless, which is actually rather liberating because it means you can have another biscuit without feeling too guilty about your place in the grand cosmic scheme, or whether you're fulfilling some preordained Keytragon purpose. Cathar pauses, biscuit halfway to his mouth. The universe is not meaningless. The hegemony gives it meaning. Does it, you ask Ginley? Or does it just give it? Kragan management. The warlord stares out over your balcony railing at the silent city bathed in the eerie light of his own fleet. He looks down at the half-eaten biscuit in his hand, then at the teacup. The steam curls upwards, carrying the scent of Darjeeling, and, perhaps, the first faint wisps of an existential crisis he never saw coming. He came expecting laser fire and declarations of war. He's getting gentle philosophical prodding, and a rather nice confection. The battle plans probably didn't cover this contingency. Warlord Cathar, who arrived on your balcony looking like a thundercloud in an angry insectoid beetle helmet, now seems more like a slightly damp squib. He finishes his second biscuit with a slow, contemplative series of mandible crunches, his red optics no longer quite so fiercely focused on galactic domination, but rather on the crumbs left on the plate. He eventually places the delicate teacup back on its saucer, with an uncharacteristically gentle cling. My presence is required. Back on the flagship, he finally says, his voice lacking its earlier boom. There are adjustments to be made to the planetary assimilation schedule. Of course, you reply, offering a serene nod. Don't let the tea get cold on your way out. And do tell your colleagues, the biscuit offer is open to the entire fleet. Though I might need a bigger oven. He gives a curt, jerky nod, a gesture that seems to convey profound internal conflict. Then his personal anti-gravity disc hums to life. With a final lingering look at the half-empty teapot, he zips back up toward the colossal underbelly of the nearest ship, disappearing like a reluctantly recalled genie. You can almost picture it, can't you? Up there, on the bridge of the Kragan flagship, the mind-domitable wheel of Fraxa, or whatever equally imposing name it bears, a scene of well-ordered, militaristic chaos is probably unfolding. Imagine rows of Kraken officers, all sharp-band officers, angles and gleaming carapaces, hunched over their pulsating consoles. Their equivalent of a 5-alarm fire is likely blaring, not with sirens perhaps, but with a series of increasingly frantic clicks, whistles, and low-frequency rumbles. That low-frequency rumble denote extreme tactical perplexity. Screens that were supposed to be displaying glorious conquest, cities burning, populace fleeing, military forces crumbling, are instead filled with footage of you and Mrs. Her Petunias, and those teenagers still trying to photobomb Cathar's dramatic pronouncements. Field reports from scouting drones are flooding in. Subject 7 Alpha 9, designation human, female, mid-30s, armed with teapot, has engaged Warlord Cathar in beverage consumption and philosophical discourse. Recommend reclassification from hostile, primitive, to bafflingly placid entity, with access to baked goods. Their intelligence analysts, poor, multi-limbed souls, are probably sifting through data streams that feel less like strategic information and more like they've accidentally tapped into Borges' Library of Babel, an infinite expanse of human quirk, cat videos, and recipes for something called afternoon tea, which their xenolinguists are flagging with extreme prejudice, possibly suspecting it's a ritualistic prelude to some kind of psychic attack. Cognitive scientists still debate the extent to which confirmation bias dictates our interpretation of new and startling information. The Kragan analysts are likely trying to shoehorn your offer of Darjeeling into some pre-existing threat matrix category, possibly under biological warfare, mild psychotropic bruise, or aggressive pacification protocol 7. Commander, a junior officer might be reporting, his voice a series of worried clicks. Warlord Kathar's biosignature indicates elevated levels of contentment and trace elements of theobromine and tannin. Contentment, the bridge commander would roar, his own helmet quivering. He was sent to announce the subjugation of planet Dirt, not to attend a garden party. What is the meaning of this biscuit he keeps mentioning in his preliminary field report? Is it a weapon? A new form of human shield? Their meticulously crafted invasion checklist, honed over centuries of successful conquest across numerous star systems, probably has boxes for crush resistance, deploy shock troops, initiate orbital bombardment. It almost certainly does not have a checkbox for respond to offer of herbal infusion and small, sweetened cakes. You can imagine them replaying the audio of your conversation with Carr, their translation software struggling valiantly with idioms and undertones. She said, "The universe is inherently meaningless." One analyst chirps, tentacles writhing in agitation. Is this a nihilistic declaration of total war, or invitation to join the book club? And the phrase, "Don't let the tea get cold," another interjects, a threat, a temporal distortion weapon reference, or just concern about beverage temperature. The poor Keith Ragan comms officer, tasked with deciphering your casual offer for the fleet to drop by for biscuits, probably just short-circuited his translation matrix and is now rocking back and forth, muttering about infinite baked goods. It's like that bizarre case of the phantom barber of Pascagoula back in World War II, during the height of war anxiety in a Mississippi town. An unknown assailant began breaking into homes and snipping locks of hair from sleeping women. Minimal physical harm was done, but the psychological weirdness, the sheer inexplicable nature of the attack, caused widespread panic and utter confusion among authorities. The Kragan officers are probably feeling a similar sense of what on Gleep Glorp is even happening. They came prepared for a straightforward invasion, for predictable patterns of resistance or surrender. Instead, they've encountered something so far off their tactical maps, it might as well be from another dimension of strategic thought, or lack thereof. The entire Trithragan military doctrine is likely predicated on a few core assumptions. That lesser species are either fearful, aggressive, or easily cowed. Your calm, your polite offering, your gentle existential prodding, it doesn't compute. It's like trying to divide by zero. Their operational logic just crashes. Are humans incredibly brave, incredibly foolish? Or are they operating on a level of psychological warfare so advanced it's indistinguishable from genuine hospitality? The debate probably rages across their internal networks, a flurry of confused, anxious signals from a fleet that, just hours ago, considered itself the master of this solar system. Now, they're not so sure who's mastering whom, especially when confronted with the concept of another cup, while the command bridge of the indomitable will of Krasaba is buzzing like a disturbed hive of very large, very confused metallic insects. Warlord Keithar has retreated to his private chambers. You can imagine it, can't you? A stark, functional space, all polished gray alloys and subdued lighting, designed for a being whose life, until a few hours ago, was a predictable sequence of strategic briefings, battle simulations, and the occasional triumphant subjugation. Helmet, that magnificent, angry insectoid beetle contraption that so impressed you earlier, now sits on a plasteel table, its red optics dark and unblinking, looking less like a symbol of terror and more like a discarded theatrical prop. Himself, San Helmet might look surprisingly weary. Perhaps his species, beneath the fearsome battle armor, has expressive brow ridges that are currently furrowed in profound consternation. Or might be his multiple mandibles are set in a Cathragan equivalent of a troubled frown. He paces the length of his chamber, the metallic tang of recycled ship air suddenly feeling stale, oppressive. The lingering, phantom scent of Darjeeling and chocolate biscuits seems to mock the sterile efficiency of his worship. He keeps replaying the encounter. Your calm voice, your offer of tea, your biscuits. He, a warlord of the Pragan hegemony, a veteran of 1,000 skirmishes and a dozen planetary conquests, recipient of the Order of the Exploding Nebula, first class, had been momentarily disarmed, not by a plasma cannon or a psionic blast, but by a small, sweet, crumbly disk, and a question about the inherent meaninglessness of the universe. Philosophers have long debated whether the principle of might makes right constitutes a justifiable ethical stance or is merely a convenient rationalization for unchecked aggression. Cathar is now unwittingly enrolled in a very practical T-Fuel seminar on the topic, and he's finding the coursework unexpectedly challenging. His entire existence has been built upon the Fragan warrior ethos. Strength is virtue, conquest is progress, obedience is paramount. He was bred for war, trained for command, conditioned to see the galaxy as a vast untamed wilderness to be brought under the orderly, if somewhat forceful, management of the hegemony. His internal Kefragan warrior spirit guide, usually a reliable source of stoic battle wisdom, is probably completely silent on the matter of unexpected tea ceremonies. If he tried to consult the Kefragan tactical manuals, he'd find detailed instructions for orbital bombardment and ground assault, but likely nothing under Chapter 7, engaging unexpectedly placid primitives offering infused beverages, Appendix Z, subsection pastries, potentially weaponized, might be his only very slim hope. He almost feels like a very confused, heavily armored version of Ashoka, the ancient Indian emperor of the Mauryan dynasty, who, after witnessing the horrific carnage of his victory in the Kalinga War in the 3rd century BCE, surveyed the devastation and had such a profound change of heart that he renounced warfare and embraced Buddhism, dedicating the rest of his reign to peace and welfare. Ka hasn't witnessed carnage on planet Dirt, quite the opposite. The utter rakin of expected violence, your serene refusal to play the designated role of cowering victim or doomed resistor, is ironically proving just as disorienting as any battlefield. He picks up a data slate, intending to file his official report. Objective: announce planetary subjugation. Achieved. Technically, hostile action encountered. None. None. Implication: deeply, profoundly confusing. How does one quantify existential musings over Darjeeling in a military report? His superiors on Cathrax Prime would demand clear, concise data, not a rambling treatise on the philosophical ramifications of human hospitality. Perhaps there's a Kefragan word for the unique sensation he's experiencing, a specific term for the profound, hollow weariness that settles upon a seasoned warrior who realizes his anticipated glorious battlefield is not one of flashing energy blasts and heroic last stands, but of polite conversation, unexpected confectionery, and questions about cosmic purpose, a sort of Druknax, the great cosmic sigh of a conqueror confronted by radical, unyielding kindness. He finds himself, much to his own internal alarm, wondering if you had any of those little shortbread ones left. Looks at the trophies adorning his chamber walls, the tattered banner of the Silosian swarm, the ceremonial energy blade of a vanquished general chieftain, the crystallized tear of a floopy-doo. Don't ask. They were once symbols of his prowess, his dedication to the hegemony. Now they seem a bit garish, a bit loud. He finds himself thinking about your words, that casual, almost flippant remark about the universe being inherently meaningless, and how that means one can enjoy another biscuit without guilt. It was, of course, preposterous Kragan doctrine, clearly stated that the hegemony was the meaning, but a tiny, treacherous part of his mind, a part that tasted suspiciously like chocolate and bergamot whispered, "What if she's right?" The very foundations of his being are vibrating, not from the thrum of the ship's engines, but from the tremor of doubt. For a Trakan warlord, doubt is not just a weakness. It's a betrayal of everything their civilization stands for. Yet, it's there, a small, persistent seed planted by a calm human with a teapot, threatening to grow into a bewildering forest of questions. What if lesser civilizations weren't just waiting for Cathragan guidance? What if they had their own purposes, their own perfectly valid, if somewhat tea-obsessed, ways of being? The thought is as terrifying as it is strangely liberating. Cathar stares out of his viewport at the swirling blue and white marble of Earth below, no longer seeing just another planet to be catalogued and controlled, but a source of profound and control, deeply unsettling mystery. So while the Kragan High Command is trying to figure out if a poetry slam constitutes a declaration of war by rhythmic verse, and Warlord Cathar is reevaluating his life choices over the memory of your Darjeeling, this gentle wave of human connection is washing over landing parties and scout drones all across this pale blue dot you call home. It's not just your little tea party, oh no. This is a global potluck of peace, and the bewildered guests of honor are armed with planet crackers, but are increasingly finding themselves armed with nothing more than a fork and a profound sense of confusion. You can almost zoom out like one of those satellite views in a spy movie and see these little pockets of serene hospitality blossoming everywhere. Down in Italy, you can just picture a formidable nonna, arms dusted with flour, confronting a 7-foot-tall Cathragan warrior who probably only poked his head out of a landing craft for a quick recon, with a steaming plate of lasagna. Mangia, Warlord Sorp, you're too thin for galactic conquest. You need some meat on those, carapace plates. The warrior, trained to deflect plasma bolt, has no defense against a determined Italian grandmother, insisting he try her ragu over in Japan, a Fragan reconnaissance drone, probably designed for silent infiltration and data gathering, hovers, mesmerized before a traditional tea house. Inside, a tea master with movements as precise and ancient as the stars themselves is performing the intricate Chanoryu ceremony, not for human guests, but for the drone's multifaceted optical sensor. The sheer, focused calm, the centuries of tradition poured into each gesture, is likely being analyzed by Cathragan AI as some kind of complex, hypnotic ritual. Is it a prelude to attack, or just really, really good tea presentation? Then you drift over to the bustling coffee farms of Colombia, where growers are offering freshly roasted and brewed café de la resistencia, a la tentación de conquistarnos, coffee of resistance, to the temptation of conquering us, to any Cathragan who looks like they need a perk up. The rich aroma alone is probably enough to make a few of the invaders question the bland nutrient paste served on their ships. Their analysts have likely cataloged over 7,000 distinct fermented or infused botanical beverages being offered to their troops planet Y. By now, they're probably requesting an immediate dispatch of xenobotanists and possibly a very large fleet-issued universal antacid dispenser. The ancient Greek concept of xenia, that sacred and almost overwhelming duty of hospitality towards strangers, has been genetically imprinted on the entire species, now manifesting on a planetary scale. Zeus himself would be impressed, possibly alarmed by this level of guest friendship toward beings who, let's not forget, initially threatened significant planetary redecoration. Cultural anthropologists still debate the universality of certain gestures, a smile, an offered hand, a slight bow, as unambiguous indicators of welcome versus, say, nervous appeasement when encountering a vastly superior force. The Kithragan tactical AI is probably having a meltdown trying to categorize the nuances of a Parisian short versus a Thai when both are accompanied by an offer of some local delicacy they can't quite identify. And right here, perhaps in the vibrant, bustling streets of Hanoi, you might see a street vendor, her face etched with a lifetime of stories, calmly offering a steaming bowl of pho, rich with star anise and cinnamon, or a tall, refreshing glass of trada to a Kithragan patrol drone hovering curiously over a market overflowing with colorful produce, the aroma of lime, chili, and fresh herbs mingles with the faint, sterile scent of bewildered alien technology. The drone, programmed for hostility assessment, just registers delicious smells and a distinct lack of incoming projectiles. It might even tilt its sensor array in a way that could almost be interpreted as olfactory curiosity. Across the globe, it's the same story with delightful local variations. In Morocco, it's a sweet mint tea poured from a height into tiny, ornate glasses. In Mexico, it's someone bravely offering a kragan, a taco al pastor, with a gentle but firm warning about the green salsa. Este si pica, comandante. This one's really spicy, commander. The alien, after a tentative taste, might experience a sudden, urgent need for all that trada from Hanoi, its ocular sensors spontaneously irrigating in response to the capsaicin. Is it a biological weapon, a test of warrior fortitude, or just really enthusiastic seasoning? It's like the ancient Silk Road has been re-established, not with caravans of camels and merchants trudging across continents, but with a spontaneous global exchange of goodwill, where instead of silk and spices, humanity is trading in empathy and, well, an astonishing variety of local snacks and beverages. This isn't a coordinated strategy. It's a deeply human, almost instinctual response, bubbling up from countless different cultures, each offering their own unique flavor of welcome to Thea. Would-be conquerors. The Fragans came expecting a planet of primitive warriors ripe for subjugation, another notch on their imperial war belt. Instead, they found a planet-sized, open-air food festival and cultural exchange program. And they're the deeply confused guests of honor. Their label of planet dirt is starting to look wildly inaccurate. Planet surprisingly tasty, if a bit eccentric might be more fitting. Mashir, united calm, this global pandemic of politeness. Something their battle computers and imperial doctrines simply cannot process, just as you're starting to think that humanity's global campaign of relentless, bewildering hospitality might actually be working, that perhaps the Kithragan hegemony is collectively scratching its various appendages and considering a polite, confused withdrawal. The sky darkens further, and this time it's not just more of the same brooding, obsidian behemoths. Oh no, these new arrivals are different, tweaker, perhaps, sharper angles, more visible weaponry, a general air of we didn't come for the tea, we came to kick down the door. These, you sense, are the Kithragan varsity team, the ones they send in when the initial wave encounters. Well, whatever gobbled reports they've been receiving about planet Dirt and its unexpectedly robust biscuit supply, a fresh wave of dread, you might think, should be rippling across the globe. Instead, what ripples is a collective sigh of, "Oh, more of them." Right then, better put the kettle on again, and someone fetch the emergency scone recipe. It's as if humanity, having now become rather adept at this peculiar form of interstellar diplomacy, simply sees it as an opportunity to scale up production. The new arrivals probably received a pre-jump briefing about conquering a primitive planet, expecting valiant but ultimately futile resistance, picturing themselves making heroic charges against crumbling defenses. Nothing in their current battle primers would have mentioned advanced scone-based diplomacy or the tactical deployment of avant-garde poetry slam welcome committees. These new ships descend with a far more aggressive posture, their weapons ports glowing ominously, their engines emitting a guttural snarl that seems to promise swift and efficient planetary redecoration. No biscuits involved. Thank you very much. Turned away. Charmanters are likely bellowing threats, demanding immediate capitulation, preparing to unleash the kind of overwhelming force that has made the Fragan name whispered with fear across countless star systems. And what do they find? They find more refreshment tables being set up, volunteers calmly laying out checkered cloths, arranging plates of freshly baked scones, fruit scones, cheese scones, even some experimental chili chocolate chip ones someone in New Mexico thought might appeal to a more adventurous alien palate. And here in Vietnam, perhaps alongside the pho and trada that soothed the first wave, little stalls are now also offering banh pia or delicate bang bò nướng, their sweet, flaky, or chewy goodness. Another unexpected item in humanity's arsenal of delicious de-escalation. You can almost hear the screech of mental gears grinding on the bridges of these new Kragan warships. Status report, Sub-Commander Zegork. The new fleet overlord probably barks. Ere the primitives cowering, are their defenses shattered? Overlord, primitives appear to be offering us small, baked flour products with preserved fruit spreads and a form of aerated bovine lactation. Back? What? Is this some kind of trick? A biological agent disguised as a scone? The first wave of Fragan's ship, those already semi-marinating in a planetary bath of existential tea and relentless goodwill, are probably observing this with a mixture of weary amusement and a strange sort of veteran pride. You can imagine Rizzle Keith Fragan, sergeant from the First Fleet, subtly trying to calm a nervous-looking ensign on one of the new ships. Absorb, kid, relax. Try the little triangular sandwiches, if they offer them. They're surprisingly good. Whatever you do, don't make eye contact with the one offering the interpretive dance. Just don't. This whole situation is starting to feel a bit like Australia's infamous Great Emu War of 1932. The Australian military, armed with machine gun, was deployed to combat a population of emus damaging crops in Western Australia. Despite their superior firepower, the soldiers found themselves utterly outmaneuvered by the large, flightless birds who proved remarkably resilient and unpredictable. The Fragan military might, for all its technological supremacy, is proving similarly ineffective against a planet full of stubbornly unflappable hosts, armed with rolling pins, and an endless supply of Darjeeling. According to the Kardashev scale, which ranks civilizations by their energy mastery, humanity is barely a Type 0, still largely dependent on fossil fuels, while the Kragan hegemony, with its interstellar fleets, is probably cruising around as a solid Type 2, capable of harnessing the energy of entire stars. Yet Type 0 seems to be holding its own, not with force fields or antimatter torpedoes, but with Earl Grey existential comfort, and now warm scones with clotted cream. It's certainly not what Nikolai Kardashev predicted when he formulated the scale back in the 1960s. He probably didn't factor in the disarming power of a well-buttered crumpet. Sociologists often discuss moral panics, where a society collectively overreacts to a perceived threat, with fear and anxiety becoming disproportionate to the actual danger. The Keithragans, however, seem to be inducing a global moral calm, where humanity is collectively underreacting with such pervasive serenity that it's causing the invaders to have the actual panic. The new fleet commanders, expecting to sow terror, find themselves met with polite inquiries about dietary restrictions. Are Keithragan gluten intolerant by any chance? We have some rather nice rice flour scones. If so, the bewildered pronouncements from the new ships likely echo those of the first wave, only with an added layer of frustration. Did we warp to the wrong planet? Is this some kind of elaborate planetary defense system involving mass psychological disorientation through excessive politeness? Did Warlord Keithar defect and open a chain of interstellar tea shops? The poor Keithragan tacticians must be tearing their antennae out. Their invasion plans, so carefully constructed, are dissolving into a sticky mess of jam, cream, and profound cultural misunderstanding. They came expecting to fight warriors. They found a planet of unflappable, almost aggressively hospitable hosts, who seemed to view an alien invasion primarily as an excellent excuse for a planet-wide bake-off. The reinforcements, primed for glorious battle, are instead getting a crash course in human pleasantries, one scone at a time. And so, my friends, as the delightful aroma of freshly baked scones and Vietnamese banh bo begin to mingle with the metallic tang of alien war fleets, a new element enters this peculiar interstellar equation. The initial shock and bewilderment on the part of the Kragan invaders, both the first wave and the more recently arrived, heavily armed reinforcements, is slowly giving way to conversation. Not the terse demand and capitulate sort of conversation they're used to, but genuine, often meandering, and deeply unsettling dialogues initiated by the very beings they came to conquer. Humanity, it seems, having successfully plied its would-be overlords with carbohydrates, is now moving on to the main course, existential philosophy and a gentle Socratic dismantling of the Keithragan imperial mindset. You can picture these scenes unfolding across the globe in 1,000 different, wonderfully human settings. A Keithragan sub-commander, let's call him Graknok, from the second more aggressive fleet, finds himself cornered not by laser fire, but by a retired philosophy professor in a tweed jacket in a quiet Cambridge college. Garden, kindly over his spectacles, is patiently explaining the concept of utilitarianism versus deontology, all while Graknok's internal threat assessment software is probably flagging syllogistic reasoning as a potential new form of psychic attack. But if the ultimate aim of the hegemony is to bring order, the professor might muse, gently pruning a rose bush. What is the quantifiable value of an order imposed without consent versus the perhaps messier, but ultimately more fulfilling, order that arises from shared understanding and, dare I say, happiness? Graknok, whose understanding of happiness hitherto involves successful target obliteration, just stares blankly at a particularly vibrant rose. Meanwhile, in a serene monastery nestled in the Himalayas, a Fragan emissary, initially sent to demand the monks' immediate surrender of their, presumably, strategic goat cheese reserves, finds herself engaged in a silent tea ceremony with a wizened lama. After an hour of shared quiet and meticulously poured butter tea, the lama simply asks, You have journeyed far? Have you found what you seek within yourself, or do you still search for it in the worlds of others? The emissary whose life has been a constant outward projection of Keithragan power has no answer. Her formidable helmet suddenly feels very heavy. It's almost like a spontaneous, global reenactment of the debates of Valladolid, those fascinating discussions held in Spain in 1550 and 51. There, theologians and scholars like Juan Ginés de Sepúlveda and Bartolomé de las Casas seriously debated the morality of the Spanish conquest of the Americas and the rights of the indigenous peoples. Only this time, the indigenous peoples of planet Dirt are armed with little more than logic, kindness, and an endless supply of surprisingly good coffee, and the would-be conquerors are the ones having their entire imperial worldview gently but persistently questioned. It's as if Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's sphere, that hypothetical global sphere of collective human thought and consciousness, has become actively, if gently weaponized, not with psychic blasts or coordinated propaganda, but with a pervasive, decentralized wave of Socratic inquiry and existential kindness that's seeping into the Keithragan collective consciousness, one confusing conversation at a time. The Fragan Empire's Human Resources Department, or whatever their equivalent is for maintaining troop morale and ideological purity, must be facing an unprecedented epidemic of existential crises. Report from Sector Gamma, Unit 734 is questioning the inherent value of galactic conquest after a lengthy discussion with a barista about the subjective nature of beauty in latte art, requesting immediate re-education protocols, and possibly the recipe for that hazelnut syrup. Ethicists continue to explore complex moral dilemmas, like various trolley problems, forcing us to question the basis of our choices when all options seem fraught with difficulty. The Fragans are now facing a planet-sized version of such a dilemma. Destroy or dominate is crashing headlong into humanity's counteroffer to discuss and digest pastries, leaving their rigidly programmed moral compasses spinning like faulty gyroscopes. They try to counter with their well-rehearsed arguments about Keithragan superiority, the benefits of their enforced order, the glory of the hegemony. But human responses are so varied, so illogical by Keithragan standards. But why is your way superior? A curious art student in Florence might ask a Keithragan patrol leader, gesturing towards Michelangelo's David, with one hand and a slice of pizza with the other. Does your hegemony have anything that inspires this kind of feeling, or this kind of taste? The Kragan, whose culture probably considers art a frivolous waste of resources, unless it's a 70-foot statue of the Supreme Overlord, looking stern, can only offer a confused series of clicks. They're encountering concepts like hobbies. You mean unscheduled, non-productive activity performed solely for personal enjoyment. This data is illogical and potentially subversive. Leisure time and the bewildering human tendency to create art, music, and stories with no apparent strategic value. Someone probably tried to explain the plot of War and Peace to a Fragan cultural attaché as an analogy for the search for meaning amidst chaos, only for the alien to get bogged down wondering about the logistical efficiency of Napoleonic supply lines versus Keithragan standard quartermaster protocols. These disarming dialogues are happening everywhere, in community centers, in university quads, over garden fences, even, one imagines, through tentatively initiated text chats with Keithragan shuttlecraft hovering just a little too low over Wi-Fi hotspots. The Keithragan militaristic conditioning, so effective for millennia, is starting to fray at the edges. The carefully constructed edifice of their imperial justification is being subtly eroded, not by explosions, but by questions, gentle, persistent, and often accompanied by a surprisingly good cup of locally sourced herbal tea. The seeds of doubt, once planted, are proving to be remarkably resilient. So, after weeks of philosophical discussions, poetry slams that probably violated several Keithragan articles of war against psychological bafflement, and enough tea and scones to float a medium-sized destroyer, the Keithragan High Command, from their distant, presumably less pastry-strewn capital on Keithrax Prime, decides it's time to bring this whole confusing planet dirt situation to a more conventional close. Their fleets are still in orbit, their warriors are still technically armed, but their collective morale is so turfully steeped in existential doubt and carb-induced lethargy that a traditional conquest is looking less appealing by the hour. They decide to issue their official terms of planetary surrender. You can imagine the scene: a stern-faced Keithragan admiral, via galactic hologram, reads out the articles to a waiting Earth. Article 1. All planetary governance to be ceded to the Fragan hegemony. Article 2. All planetary resources to be made out available for hegemonic use. Article 3. Planetary populace to integrate into Kragan societal structures and contribute to the glorious work of the hegemony. Standard boilerplate invader demands. Really? They probably expect a somber silence, perhaps a few defiant, futile speeches, followed by the grim acceptance of the inevitable. Instead, humanity, with a planet-wide shrug that somehow conveys both serene acceptance and mischievous compliance, essentially says, "All right, then. Sounds interesting. We can work with that," and then proceeds to interpret the Keithragan terms of surrender in the most wonderfully, bewilderingly human way possible. "Cede planetary governance," comes the cheerful reply from town halls and community centers around the globe. "Excellent. We've got a vacancy on the local library funding committee. The meetings are Tuesday nights. Bring your own ideas for the new children's wing, and several Keithragan representatives would be most welcome to join the neighborhood watch rota. We've been having some issues with rogue squirrels and the occasional garden gnome theft down by Han Kiem Lake in Hanoi. You might see a bewildered Keithragan shock trooper, blaster rifle slung awkwardly over its carapace, attempting to follow the graceful, flowing movements of a Tai Chi master, much to the quiet amusement of the local elders. This apparently is part of their integration into local command structures, specifically the early morning wellness and civic mindfulness program. All planetary resources to be made available for hegemonic use. The humans ponder, "Right you are. We've just tilled the community garden down on Elm Street, and there's a whole patch of lovely, fertile soil perfect for, well, whatever it is dragons eat, or perhaps you'd like to help us plant these heritage tomatoes. We're also running a city-wide composting initiative. Your leftover nutrient paste packaging would be an invaluable contribution." A Keithragan logistics officer, trained to requisition entire moonfuls of dilithium crystals, is now staring blankly at a flyer for a sea swap Sunday. This whole surrender by overwhelming hospitality approach reminds one of the potlatch ceremonies practiced by indigenous cultures of the Pacific Northwest coast of North America. Prominent families would assert their status and even defeat rivals not through warfare, but by hosting lavish feasts and giving away, or even ceremonially destroying, more wealth and goods than their opponent could ever hope to reciprocate. Was a form of conquest by competitive generosity. Humanity, it seems, is collectively potlatching the Keithragan hegemony into a state of bewildered, overfed submission, Game theorists continue to analyze scenarios that move beyond simplistic, zero-sum outcomes, exploring how cooperative strategies can actually lead to mutual, unforeseen benefits even in what initially appears to be a competitive or even hostile environment. The Teeth Dragons came expecting a win-lose scenario where they naturally would be the winners. They're being presented with a win-win, and would you like to help us choose the book for next month's Interstellar Book Club proposition? Speaking of which, integrate into Keith Dragon societal structures and contribute to the glorious work of the hegemony. Comes the human response. Splendid. We assume that means you'll be joining our various clubs and societies. The Amateur Dramatic Society is looking for someone to play the brooding alien overlord in their upcoming sci-fi comedy. Typecasting, perhaps, but you'd be a natural. And the Tuesday morning book club is just starting. To kill a mockingbird. A K-Fragan warrior, let's call him Zorp, sits stiffly in a circle of humans, a well-thumbed paperback in his three-fingered hand. So, he might ask his human hand neighbor, a kindly librarian named Agnes. We analyze the protagonist's motivations for justice instead of dissecting their anatomy for exploitable weaknesses. This is a fascinatingly inefficient use of pre-combat intelligence gathering. Agnes just smiles and offers him a lemon drizzle square. It's like the spirits seen after something like the Great Vermont Flood of 1927. After truly devastating statewide flooding, communities across the state didn't just sit around waiting for outside help. They banded together with incredible resilience and cooperative spirit to rebuild, clear roads, and flood-proof themselves, embodying a fierce independence and community focus. Humanity is now, in its own way, invasion-proofing itself through sheer, unadulterated community engagement and cordially inviting the invaders to grab a shovel, a library card, or a part in the local pantomime. The Dragon High Command on Kodthrak Prime must be receiving field reports that defy all known categories of conquest. Warlord Qatar reports that Sector 7, formerly Great Britain, has surrendered by enlisting his entire platoon. In a competitive, rose-growing competition and a rather heated debate about the merits of Darjeeling versus Assam, Subcommander Glod from Sector 12, formerly Japan, has been fully integrated into a Haiku Appreciation Society and is requesting additional instruction on the 575 syllable structure, citing its unexpected emotional resonance. Our forces in Sector 4, formerly Italy, are now largely engaged in what appears to be competitive pasta making. Troopers to Nonna Carlotta's advanced gnocchi rolling techniques. They say they're never coming back. The human capitulation is so complete, so utterly baffling in its embrace of the conquerors, that the K-Fragans are finding themselves disarmed not by force, but by the sheer, overwhelming tide of committee meetings, shared recipes, and earnest invitations to join the Parent-Teacher Association. They came to rule. They are being asked to volunteer for the bake sale, and so while on the surface of planet dirt, or planet surprisingly complicated hospitality, as some Fragan junior officers have started calling it in hushed whispers, the invaders are learning the finer points of community theater staged management and the surprisingly complex rules of competitive bird watching up in the cold, sterile corridors of their warships. A different kind of unraveling is taking place. The constant, unyielding barrage of human kindness, the relentless logic of Socratic questioning, and the sheer, baffling lack of expected violence are having a profound and deeply corrosive effect on the Kefragan imperial ideology. Their entire belief system is under siege, not by lattes and unbi-lattes and genuine curiosity. You can imagine the scenes playing out within those metallic behemoths, hanging silently in your sky. Arguments are erupting in mess halls, not over battle strategy, but over the ethical implications of forced cultural assimilation versus the merits of attending a human pottery class. Social psychologists continue to examine the complex dynamics of cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable mental state where deeply held beliefs clash violently with new, undeniable realities. The entire Kragan Armada is currently a floating laboratory for the study of such dissonance on an epic, tea-soaked, and scone-crumb scale. Hardline traditionalists who still cling to the glorious vision of Kefragan, manifest destiny, are clashing with a growing faction of Earth-curious, those who've spent a little too much time planetside, perhaps had one too many enlightening chats over a shared plate of biscuits, or have simply found Warlord Kadar's thoughtful Trilorknak to be strangely contagious. Discipline, the bedrock of the Kefragan military, is beginning to fray like an old rope. Orders from on high, often contradictory and increasingly desperate directives from Kethrax Prime, are still obeyed mostly but with a new reluctance, a questioning gaze in those multifaceted Kethragan eyes. Prepare for tactical maneuver Omega-7, a commander might bark, only to be met with a hesitant sub-officer asking, "Sir, is that the maneuver that might disrupt Mrs. Bohr?" Kagan, prize-winning Petunia Bet, she was very clear about their delicate nature during yesterday's Garden Club meeting. The Kragan shipboard psychologist, if such a profession exists for a species that traditionally solves mental anguish with more rigorous battle drills, are probably completely overwhelmed. You can almost hear their weary, clicking sighs. Another case of acute existential bewilderment. Third one, this cycle. My current recommendation for most cases of purpose anxiety syndrome is 2 Earth biscuits, a cup of chamomile tea if available, and a long contemplative stare out the viewport at that strangely peaceful blue planet. Next, the Fragans are experiencing their own version of the Great Disappointment, like those Millerite followers in 19th century America, who fervently expected a world-altering divine event on a specific date, only to find the morning after was just another morning. The glorious, galaxy-shaking conquest of this insignificant planet has somehow morphed into an endless series of potluck dinners, committee meetings, and surprisingly engaging discussions about the meaning of art. Profound, species-wide anticlimax is leading to a deep reevaluation of everything they thought they knew. What is glory, if it can be so easily deflated by a well-argued point about free will? What is strength, if it's rendered impotent by an offer of a comfortable chair and a patient ear? It's not a military collapse, you understand, more like an ideological crumbling, reminiscent in a strange, slow-motion way of how the Berlin Wall fell back in 1989. It wasn't stormed by an opposing army with tanks and bombers, but rendered irrelevant by a fundamental shift in belief, by ordinary people simply deciding the old divisions and aggressive certainties no longer made any sense. The Kefragan wall of militaristic conviction is being dismantled not by human weapons, but by human weapons. Brick by peaceful, well-intentioned, philosophically probing brick, and with this ideological erosion comes the inevitable emergence of subcultures. Kefragan soldiers, bred for conformity, are secretly developing individual tastes. Small groups huddle in forgotten storage bays, not to plot mutiny, but to listen to crackly, downloaded human pop music, arguing passionately over whether the Beatles were superior to the rolling 23rd century equivalents. The Kefragan black market, once dealing in illicit energy crystals and forbidden battle schematics, is now reportedly doing a roaring trade in bootleg Earth television series, pirated romance novels, a genre utterly unknown, and deeply scandalous in our Kragan culture, and even single-origin Vietnamese coffee beans. The rich, dark aroma, a welcome, if illicit, change from the recycled nutrient slop served in the official mess halls. The Kragan leadership, both on the ships and back on Krathrax Prime, is undoubtedly deeply divided on how to handle this bizarre, peaceful insurrection. Do they crack down, enforce ideological purity with an iron fist, and risk open rebellion from an increasingly disillusioned officer corps and rank and file, or do they try to understand? Do they, heaven forbid, learn something from these bafflingly serene, infuriatingly kind humans? Warlord Cathar, now something of an unwilling expert on human customs and philosophical quandaries, is probably being summoned to endless high-level meetings, trying to explain to stony-faced admirals why a significant portion of his fleet is now more interested in perfecting their sourdough starters than in practicing orbital bombardment patterns. The very concept of planet dirt has transformed in their minds from a target to a source of profound, and for many, deeply attractive, confusion. The siege continues, but it's the Kragan soul that's under assault, as the Kragan Armada continues its slow collective marinade in the bewildering marinade of human kindness and existential pondering. Something new, and even more unsettling for their high command, begins to bubble to the surface. It's one thing for your troop to be confused, to question orders, to secretly hoard earth-brewed coffee. It's quite another when they start defecting, not in the traditional sense of turning traitor and offering military secrets. What secrets are left when your entire invasion plan has been derailed by scones and sonnets? No, these are defections of the heart, of the mind. The first Kragan converts to calm are tentatively, cautiously, stepping out of the shadow of the hegemony and into the messy, vibrant, and utterly perplexing embrace of human culture. Can imagine the initial requests trickling into Kragan personnel departments, causing administrative chaos that rivals the Great Biscuit shortage of Week 3, application for extended planetary leave. A form might read, filled out in hesitant Kragan script, reason, to explore the existential ramifications of finger painting and its potential application in fostering interspecies understanding. The harassed Kragan HR officer probably just stamps it. Gilorknak Protocol Omega, figuring it's less paperwork than a court-martial for philosophical insubordination, or worse, having to attend another human-led seminar on the importance of work-life balance. These Kragan pioneers, tentatively stepping into human society, are like echoes of historical figures such as Philip Quack. He was an 18th-century Fante man from the Gold Coast, modern-day Ghana, who, after being educated in England and becoming the first African ordained as a priest in the Church of England, returned to his homeland as a missionary and schoolmaster. He became a living bridge, navigating the complex currents between two vastly different worlds, a task requiring immense courage and adaptability. Kragan individuals, each in their own way, are embarking on a similar journey, albeit with more carapaces and fewer powdered wigs. Developmental psychologists still explore the critical periods for cultural imprinting and debate the extent of our neuroplasticity when it comes to deeply ingrained belief systems. In adulthood, these Kragan converse are becoming a fascinating, if wholly unexpected, case study in just how much a heavily conditioned adult Kragan mind can adapt when faced with a sufficiently compelling alternative. And it must be said, an endless supply of rather good snacks. So, you start seeing them. At first, is just a few brave, or perhaps simply terminally curious, Kragans, a hulking warrior, who once prided himself on his kill-to-engagement ratio. might be found sitting awkwardly in the back of a university lecture on Renaissance art, his multifaceted eyes struggling to comprehend the symbolism in Botticelli's Primavera, but undeniably intrigued. Or another, perhaps a Kurfragan engineer whose life revolved around the co-logic of hyperdrive mechanics, is now a regular, if mostly silent, attendee at a local pottery class, her three-fingered hand surprisingly adept at shaping clay, even if her initial creations all tend to look suspiciously like miniature Kurfragan battle cruisers. Structurally sound. She might click approvingly of her lopsided, heavily fortified vase. Language exchanges become a particularly poignant and often hilarious common ground. Imagine a Fragan communications officer, fluent in 17 galactic dialects, struggling to grasp the concept of English idioms, struggling to human says, break a leg prior to a theatrical performance. He might ask his patient human tutor, "This does ye not involve literal femur fracturing as a form of pre-show intimidation or sacrifice?" Human communication is inefficiently metaphorical and prone to inducing unnecessary alarm. You might even find a Kurfragan warrior, once dedicated to calibrating plasma cannons, now meticulously learning the delicate art of folding banana leaves for bang chung in a bustling Hanoi kitchen, his brow ridges furrowed in a display of intense concentration that was previously reserved for disarming explosive devices. It's almost an inversion of those cargo cults occasionally observed in Melanesia during and after World War II. Some island communities, encountering technologically advanced outsiders for the first time, would mimic their behaviors, building mock airstrips or wearing makeshift uniforms, hoping to attract the wondrous material wealth, the cargo, they had witnessed. Here, members of the technologically superior Kurfragan fleet, who possess actual starships and energy weapons, are being drawn not towards humanity's comparatively primitive technology, but towards the non-material cargo of human peace, creativity, emotional expression, and an inexplicable societal obsession with something called brunch, a meal that seems to defy all Kurfragan notions of efficient sustenance intake. Cultural exchange programs, often informal and spontaneously organized by humans, who simply find the idea of teaching a 7-foot-tall alien warrior how to knit rather charming, are springing up everywhere. Kartrigans are joining choirs, natural bass rumbles, adding a certain galactic depth to local performances, cautiously participating in community sports, though their definition of friendly competition sometimes needs gentle recalibration, and even in a few particularly volleyball cases, auditioning for roles in amateur theater productions. The upcoming performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, with a Kurfragan playing Oberon, King of the Fairies, promises to be a theatrical event for the ages, or at least a memorable one. Of course, not all Kragans are thrilled by this. The hardliners back on the ships view these converts with suspicion and contempt, seeing them as weak-willed traitors to the hegemony. But the trickle is becoming a stream. The allure of a life not dictated by conquest and rigid hierarchy, a life where one can pursue hobbies and form friendships and discuss the merits of different earth-based baked goods without fear of disciplinary action, is proving to be a powerful one. These first converts to come are more than just individuals seeking a new way. They are living, breathing advertisements for an alternative to the Kragan way, and their quiet contentment is perhaps the most potent weapon yet unleashed against the invaders' ideology. And so, the weeks blur into months, and the initial shock of the Kurfragan Armada's arrival, followed by the even greater shock of their peaceful, if somewhat bewildered, assimilation into human society begins to settle into a new, rather peculiar, kind of normal Earth, now with more aliens. It's not a tagline you ever expected to see on a travel brochure, but here you are. The colossal Kragan warships still hang in the sky, but they've lost much of their menacing aura. They feel lost much of their menacing aura, less like instruments of impending doom and more like exceptionally large, slightly gloomy apartment blocks with questionable parking choices. Some have even acquired a smattering of graffiti, mostly philosophical questions or surprisingly good caricatures of Kragan generals done by daring art students with access to long-range paint sprayers. Life on what the Athragans affectionately, and now ironically, call planet Dirt has become a bizarrely harmonious tapestry woven from human traditions and tentative Fragan adaptations. You walk down your local high street, and alongside the familiar bakery and the slightly less familiar artisan kombucha shop, there might now be Zorp's Nutrient Paste Emporium, now with mild earth flavors, or a Fragan Rav-boot repair and polishing service. Kragan individuals, some still in their less ostentatious forms of utilitarian hegemony jumpsuits, others making valiant, if sometimes hilariously misguided, attempts at human fashion, are now a common sight. A 7-foot-tall warrior attempting to navigate a crowded supermarket aisle with a shopping trolley is a master class in awkward interspecies ballet. It's a new kind of Columbian exchange. This Earth Kragan intermingling, instead of potatoes and tomatoes crossing the Atlantic, eyes recipes for scones and Fragan philosophical treatises on the futility of unprovoked aggression, crossing the species barrier, subtly reshaping both cultures in ways one could have predicted. You're starting to hear a sort of informal pidgin developing in busy marketplaces, a charmingly clunky mix of English, Kragan clicks, and universal hand gestures, a kind of spontaneous hearth lingo that would make a L. Lamenhoff, the original creator of Esperanto, with its noble aims of fostering peace, weep with joy or possibly utter confusion. Its primary function seems to be ordering coffee and discussing the weather, which, as everyone knows, are true pillars of interspecies diplomacy. You might hear a Fragan tentatively ask a Hanoi street vendor, "Trada? Good? Yes, click, no sugar stuff for Siglar, Tank hum." Urban planners and sociologists continue to debate the subtle yet profound impacts of gentrification versus genuine community integration when diverse populations begin to share living spaces. In this case, the new Kragan arrivals aren't exactly driving up human property values with artisanal hegemony cheese shops. Kragan cheese is, by all accounts, an acquired taste and a brave acquisition at that, but their attempts to adapt their formidable, often modular, dwellings into something more neighborhood-friendly are certainly leading to some unique architectural discussions at town council meetings. Yes, Warlaw Cathar, your proposal for a rooftop plasma cannon emplacement does offer excellent views, but we're not sure it meets local planning regulations for garden features. And Thar, dear Cathar, who inadvertently kicked off this whole interspecies tea party on your balcony, has become something of a beloved local figure. He's often seen patiently explaining key Fragan astrophysics to fascinated school children who mostly just want to know if he can make things explode with his mind, or judging the annual village bake-off with a solemnity previously reserved for court-martials. He's even developed a surprisingly nuanced palate for Earth desserts, though he still maintains that hegemony nutrient bars are more structurally efficient. The initial cultural exchange programs have blossomed into full-fledged interspecies collaborations. Dragon engineers, with their advanced understanding of materials science, are helping humans develop more efficient solar panels and lighter, stronger building materials. Human artists are teaching Kragans about perspective and color theory, leading to a fascinating new school of hfy Impressionism, where landscapes often feature an alarming number of strategically placed defensive turrets. But the sunsets are, admittedly, breathtaking. You might even find Kragans developing surprisingly strong opinions on human pop culture. Zaglorg from Accounting Unit 7 insists the original Star Blasters Holovid series was far superior to the Kragan-dubbed remake. Garlack from Sanitation Crew 9 says the new human pop idol, Glitter Nova Sparklebeam, is a lyrical genius. It's getting surprisingly heated in the Kragan sector of the online fan forums. Down in the Mekong Delta, a Kragan agricultural advisor, initially sent to assess resource exploitation potential for the hegemony, is now earnestly discussing optimal rice planting techniques with local Vietnamese farmers. His multi-spectrum visor, once used for targeting IES, proving surprisingly useful for spotting early signs of crop blight, though his well-intentioned suggestions for laser weeding on a continental scale were politely but firmly declined. This new Earth is a place of constant, gentle surprises. Tea parties are now a daily interspecies ritual in many communities. Poetry slams feature Kragan warriors attempting heartfelt, if rhythmically challenged, verses about the beauty of a shared universe. The planet, once on the brink of a terrifying invasion, now hums with a strange, beautiful, and utterly unpredictable harmony. The only conquests happening now are at the local chess club, where Kragan strategic thinking sometimes, but not always, overcomes human intuition. And so, my friends, after what feels like an eternity of interspecies tea parties, impromptu poetry slams, and Kragan warriors discovering the unexpected joys of amateur gardening, a hush falls over the orbiting armada. Mind you, more like the contemplative quiet of a very large, very confused book club that's just finished a particularly challenging novel and isn't sure how to feel about the ending. The Kragan High Command, or what remains of it that hasn't already signed up for a pottery class or defected to a human folk music band, must finally address the giant, multifaceted, heavily armored elephant in the room. What now? Their grand invasion of planet Dirt, now affectionately nicknamed Planet Deliciously Complicated, has gone so spectacularly off-script that the original script is probably being used as a coffee-stained coaster on Warlord Guest's desk. You can almost picture the scene aboard the Kragan flagship, the mind-domitable Wheel of Krifrax, which many of its crew now jokingly call the slightly indomitable, but open to suggestions regarding Krampus. A grand council is convened. Stern-faced admirals, their carapaces gleaming under the harsh ship lights, gather around a holographic display that no longer shows battle plans, but rather complex flowcharts attempting to quantify human unpredictability and the strategic impact of well-buttered baked goods. Political scientists often debate the long-term viability and efficacy of soft power, cultural influence, diplomacy, shared values, versus traditional hard power like military might. Planet Earth, with its accidental, pastry-fueled disarmament of a galactic superpower, is offering a rather compelling, if highly unconventional, and utterly delicious case study for that debate. The arguments begin. Clicks and arguments begin. Guttural pronouncements echoing in the vast chamber. "We must withdraw," declares Admiral Vorg, a traditionalist whose mandibles quiver with barely suppressed outrage. Report our findings to hfy Prime. Regroup, re-strategize. The hegemony's pride has been lightly buttered and sprinkled with cinnamon. This cannot stand. Then, perhaps a younger commander, let's call her Sub-Warlord Thalia, who has spent considerable time on Earth, liaising with a particularly persuasive group of kindergarten teachers about the importance of sharing and using your inside voice, offers a counterpoint. With all due respect, Admiral, what exactly would we be regrouping Ja for? Another attempt to subjugate a species that meets aggression with aggressively good hospitality. Many of our troops have adapted. They have formed attachments. Some have even started local hfy human five-a-side football teams, and they're surprisingly competitive. Commanders Glore, who once dreamt of planting the hegemony flag on every continental landmass of planet Dirt, now dreams mostly of perfecting his pho broth recipe he learned from a street vendor in Hue. The thought of returning to recycled nutrient paste is, frankly, a key argument in his pro-Earth integration strategy presentation to the Council, complete with aroma samples. The hfy invasion, as originally conceived by the strategists on hfy Prime, is well and truly tamam shud, finished, like the mysterious note found with the Somerton man on an Australian beach back in 1948, signaling an end. But instead of an unsolved enigma, its ending is an open book, or rather, an open invitation to stay for another cup of tea and perhaps a workshop on intergalactic carries. Report back to hfy, if it ever gets written, would be a masterpiece of understatement. Mission status, complicated, objective, conquer planet Dirt, achieved, in the sense that we are now frequently invited to their barbecues. Objective, maintain ideological purity, catastrophically failed due to excessive exposure to baked goods, folk music, and surprisingly insightful conversations about the nature of happiness. For those hfy who might choose to depart, their exit would be less a mystery like the lost colony of Roanoke, where English settlers vanished from the North Carolina coast in the late 16th century, leaving only cryptic clues. Here, any departing hfy would leave behind a legacy of shared recipes, a forwarding address for the local interspecies book club, and probably a few tearful human friends promising to send care packages of artisanal coffee and romance novels. Some hfy, particularly older traditionalists, will undoubtedly choose to leave. The call of the hegemony, the familiar disciplines of their own culture, however flawed they might now seem, will be too strong to ignore. They might worry, too, about withdrawal symptoms, not from some illicit substance, but from good earth coffee, the comforting rhythm of human conversation, or the surprising emotional depth of a Vietnamese folk song heard drifting from a window in Da Nang. But many others, you sense, will choose to stay. Why return to the sterile predictability of hfy fleet life when you've discovered the chaotic joy of a human music festival, the quiet satisfaction of tending a community garden, or the intellectual thrill of debating philosophical paradoxes with retired human librarian who always has a fresh pot of tea on the go? Subcommander Glop from the Engineering Division has, you hear, officially requested asylum. His stated reason: he's discovered binge-watching human historical dramas from the 21st century and cannot, in good conscience, leave this planet until he ascertains whether Lady Anya successfully marries the brooding but kind-hearted Duke of Pudlington, despite the machinations of her scheming step-aunt. Priorities, you see? The decision hangs in the balance, not just for the fleet as a whole, But for each individual kraken to go or to stay, to retreat in confusion, their worldview irrevocably altered, their tales of planet dirt destined to become cautionary legends in the T-Fragan academies, or to embrace this bafflingly peaceful, infuriatingly kind, and strangely welcoming world, to become something new, something Tarfling. The great ships hum, no longer with the energy of war, but with the quiet thrum of 1,000 private dilemmas, 1,000 hearts, or whatever K-Fragans have, weighing the known against the wonderfully, terrifyingly unknown. And so the years passed, as gently as falling cherry blossoms, or the gentle steam rising from a perfectly brewed cup of lotus tea from a lotus pond. The K-Fragan's great dilemma, to stay or to go, was resolved not with a bang, nor with a whimper, but with a series of thoughtful discussions, a surprising number of tearful goodbyes on both sides, and an equally surprising number of K-Fragan applications for permanent residence and membership in local gardening societies. A significant portion of the fleet eventually departed, taking with them not plundered resources or subjugated people, but a bewildering cargo of earthly literature, artisanal coffee beans, unfinished knitting projects, and a profound species-altering case of altering collective Zortnax. The ships that remained had their weapon systems turned off forever, their massive frames slowly, almost shyly, blending into the Earth's horizon like a new, irregularly shaped mountain range. What emerged from this utterly baffling encounter is a new interstellar dawn, not of conquest or empire, but of something much quieter, much stranger, and infinitely more interesting. Earth, once just another blue marble on the K-Fragan star charts, marked for assimilation, has become a vibrant, unique experiment in interspecies harmony. It's a planet where the corner cafe might have a Fragan barista who makes a surprisingly good flat white, once he understood that flat didn't refer to a tactical planetary bombardment pattern, and where human children learn K-Fragan constellation myths alongside Greek legends in school. In a quiet courtyard in Hoi An, human and K-Fragan children might sit side by side, learning the delicate art of calligraphy from an elderly master, their brushstrokes, some bold and angular, others soft and flowing, creating a new visual language for a shared future. Nearby, a cafe serves a blend of Robusta coffee, with a hint of a Fragan spice tastes remarkably like peaceful contemplation and subtle notes of toasted algebra. This new era on Earth, and perhaps its gentle ripples are even reverberating back to the distant, rigid heart of Kithrak's prime, via those departing ships, feels like a new renaissance, a décadence, if you will, just as 14th century Europe experienced a rebirth of arts, sciences, and philosophy fueled by rediscovered classical knowledge and burgeoning trade with other cultures. This unexpected intermingling of human ingenuity and K-Fragan discipline, now gently softened, is sparking a fervent period of cultural, artistic, and philosophical exploration. New forms of music blend terrestrial rhythms with K-Fragan sonic architecture. New philosophies grapple with the delightful paradox of a warrior race disarmed by kindness. New technologies, born from shared knowledge, focus not on weaponry, but on sustainable living, universal communication, and crucially, perfecting that self-heating teacup. Historians still argue whether the decisive turning point of the K-Fragan visitation period was the invention of the self-buttering scone or the mass translation of Earth poetry into K-Fragan clickspeak, but everyone agrees the results have been delicious. Many Kragans who chose to stay describe experiencing a profounding effect, an inverse of the overview effect. Astronauts report, when viewing our fragile planet from the vastness of space, instead of seeing a distant, abstract sphere, These dragons found themselves deeply embedded within its baffling, beautiful, biscuit-fueled heart, forever changing their perspective on the hegemony, their own rigidly structured society, and their own rigidly structured society, predetermined place in the cosmos. They've learned about leisure, about hobbies that serve no purpose other than joy, about the strange human compulsion to care for small, furry animals. Some Thragan engineers, initially horrified by the perceived inefficiency of human holidays, now meticulously plan their families' Christmas light displays with a dedication once reserved for optimizing hyperdrive flux coils. Yes, Zorp, scheduling present opening in 15-second intervals for maximum efficiency does still somewhat dampen the spontaneous festive spirit, but your color-coded gift organization is, admittedly, impressive. Futurists and philosophers continue to speculate on the necessary conditions for achieving long-term interspecies or intercultural harmony, often proposing complex treaties, shared economic goals, or overarching political structures. This transformed Earth, however, seems to suggest the primary ingredients might just be mutual patience, an endless supply of varied conversational stimulants like coffee and tea, a shared, if sometimes bewildered, sense of humor, and the courage to offer a hand or a tentacle or a claw in friendship rather than aggression. Human history books now contain some very peculiar chapters detailing the Great Scone Offensive and the philosophical disarmament of Sector Gamma. Warlord Cathar, now a twinkly-eyed elder statesman beloved by humans and Kragans alike, often lectures gently on Fetcher's gently surprising diplomatic power of a well-steeped Earl Grey, and a sincere compliment. He still maintains that your balcony was where the entire course of Kragan history took a sharp, unexpected, and ultimately delightful left turn. The universe, it turns out, has a wonderfully strange sense of humor, and its punchlines often involve a shared cup of something warm and a conversation that changes everything. Planet Dirt, once a mere speck, is now a beacon, a testament to the idea that understanding doesn't always require agreement, and that peace can be found not in the silence of conquest, but in the warm, vibrant, and sometimes gloriously silly chatter of newfound friends. The stars outside your window seem a little brighter tonight, don't they? Or perhaps it's just the gentle glow of a world made kinder, stranger, and infinitely more interesting by the simple act of offering tea to those who expected terror. As our journey together for this evening comes to a soft close, allow the images to linger. Kragan warriors learning to knit, human philosophers patiently explaining irony to 7-foot-tall insectoid beings, the shared laughter echoing in community gardens where once only suspicion was sown. Let the story settle around you like a comforting blanket, the gentle cadence of our shared narrative, a soft lullaby. The universe is vast and full of possibilities, some more absurdly heartwarming than others. Remember the calm, the unexpected connections, the quiet triumph of understanding over aggression. May these thoughts cradle you as you drift towards sleep, into dreams where even the most fearsome invaders can be disarmed by a well-brewed cup and a willingness to listen. The journey was long, the journey was long, the scones were plentiful, and the peace, in the end, was wonderfully, beautifully brewed